The desert at night isn't quiet. It breathes, it watches. Out here, in the heart of Navajo land, the wind carries more than dust. It carries whispers you're not supposed to hear. The moon hangs low, pale against the jagged silhouettes of mesas, and somewhere in that emptiness, a howl cuts through the dark. At first, it sounds like a coyote, but then the pitch twists, bending into something that doesn't belong to any animal you know. You stop, scanning the shadows. Something moves low to the ground, faster than your eyes can follow. Among the Navajo, they call it Yi-nal-lushi. With it, he goes on all fours. You don't say the name at night, not unless you want it to notice you. And just as the wind shifts, you hear it, a faint voice, calling your name from somewhere you can't see. In Navajo tradition, there are stories you inherit like family heirlooms. They're not told for entertainment. They're warnings, heavy with the weight of generations. The Skinwalker, or Yi-nal-lushi, belongs to a path called the Witchery Way. It's not the path of healing or balance, but one that turns away from harmony with the earth and seeks power through dark, forbidden acts. The Navajo believe that to become a Skinwalker, a person must commit the ultimate betrayal, taking the life of a close family member. This act severs their bond to the people and to the natural order, and in return grants them the ability to shapeshift into animals. The coyote is most often spoken of, but they can take the form of wolves, owls, foxes, or even people they've seen. The transformation isn't just physical. They take on the speed, senses, and strength of the form they wear, along with something far more dangerous: the ability to mimic human voices. Speaking about them is taboo, especially at night. In many Navajo communities, even saying the word Skinwalker is avoided. It's believed the more attention you give them, the more likely they are to notice you. Elders will tell you these stories only in certain settings, and they'll choose their words carefully because the Skinwalker is not a legend to them. It's a presence, a real danger that can move unseen through the desert. Historically, stories of Skinwalkers have been linked to times of unrest, illness, or misfortune. When livestock died mysteriously, when a hunter vanished without a trace, and strange figures were seen moving across the horizon in the moonlight, suspicion would grow. The Navajo Nation has its own ways of identifying and stopping a Skinwalker, but those methods are rarely shared with outsiders. Some say a skilled medicine person can undo a Skinwalker's power, but only if they know the true identity hidden beneath the animal form. This is why, in Navajo culture, the Skinwalker serves more than one role. It's both a real threat and a reminder of the boundaries that keep the community safe. The fear keeps people alert, respectful of taboos, and wary of those who seek too much power. It's a belief rooted not in campfire entertainment, but in the deep connection between the people, the land, and the balance they protect. When people try to describe a Skinwalker, they often hesitate. It's not just because they're afraid. It's because the Skinwalker doesn't have one fixed form. It is a shapeshifter, able to take on the body of any creature it chooses. The most common form is the coyote, but there are countless stories of them appearing as wolves, foxes, bears, owls, and even stray dogs. In some accounts, the change happens so quickly, it's almost like the figure melts from human to animal in one fluid motion. In their animal forms, something always feels off. The proportions might be wrong, the movements slightly too smooth or too jerky. Their eyes, this is what almost every witness mentions, never look like an animal's. They glow an unnatural shade of red or orange in the darkness, and even in daylight, they seem almost human. People say if you lock eyes with a Skinwalker, you'll feel a deep, cold wave of dread, like it's not just looking at you, but into you. The transformation isn't limited to appearance. A Skinwalker gains the full abilities of whatever creature it becomes: the speed of a coyote, the strength of a bear, the silent flight of an owl. But that's only the beginning. They're also said to mimic the voices of people you know. Imagine being alone in the desert and hearing your sister calling for help, or your friend laughing in the dark, only to realize they're miles away. This is one of their cruelest tricks, designed to lure a victim away from safety. There are stories of skinwalkers moving on two legs in animal form, their gait strangely human. Some claim they can read minds or influence thoughts, planting fear so intense it paralyzes their prey. Others believe they can control animals, turning flocks of birds or packs of coyotes into extensions of themselves. In every version, they are predators that thrive on psychological terror as much as physical harm. The power of a skinwalker doesn't come without a cost. According to Navajo tradition, becoming one requires breaking the most sacred laws, acts of violence, betrayal, and desecration. It's said they steal the skins of animals to wear as disguises, but these are not simple costumes. They're bound by ritual, infused with the stolen life and power of the creature. Some stories claim that burning the skin will strip the skinwalker of its power, forcing it back into human form. But even knowing that, few would dare to try. Encounters often describe a heavy silence before the skinwalker appears. No wind, no insects, just a stillness that presses against your ears. Then comes the movement, fast and deliberate, always staying just at the edge of vision. If you run, it follows. If you stop, it waits. And sometimes it lets you see it clearly, as if daring you to believe what you're looking at. The Navajo speak of them rarely, but when they do, the description is always the same at its core. A being that has abandoned its humanity for power, one that moves in ways you can't predict and sees you long before you see it. This story was told by an elder from a secluded part of the Navajo Nation, passed down from his grandmother. It begins in the early 1900s, a time when the desert was even more silent at night, when light came only from the moon or the fire, and the dark felt heavier than it does today. One winter evening, a family was returning from a gathering in a neighboring hogan, walking the narrow path that wound between sandstone cliffs and long stretches of red earth. The night air was sharp with cold, and the father carried his youngest child wrapped tightly in a blanket, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness. But halfway home, they began to notice another set of steps behind them, matching their pace exactly, stopping whenever they stopped. The father turned to look, expecting to see another traveler, yet the path behind them was empty, and still the crunch of frozen dirt continued, always just far enough back to remain unseen. When they finally reached their hogan, the family rushed inside, securing the wooden door, but the footsteps did not fade. Instead, they began to circle the home slowly, again and again, until the sound was joined by a faint scratching, like claws dragging along the outer wall. The grandmother, who was with them that night, whispered that it was Yinaldlushi and warned everyone to stay away from the windows. The father tried to ignore her warning, but curiosity pulled him toward a narrow crack in the wall. Through it, under the pale moonlight, he saw a coyote standing in the yard. It did not move like any animal he had ever seen. Its front legs bent at an unnatural angle, and its glowing red eyes were fixed directly on the crack where he stood. Then, slowly, the coyote rose onto its hind legs, never breaking its gaze. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the creature was gone, leaving nothing but silence. Outside, in the red dirt, the family found tracks, coyote prints that, after several steps, changed into bare human footprints leading away into the desert. The elder said his grandmother never spoke the creature's name again, and that to this day, the place where those prints disappeared is avoided after dark. Another story comes from our time, told by someone who never believed in such things until one night changed that forever. In the summer of 2014, a young man named Aaron was driving alone along a long stretch of highway that cuts through the high desert of New Mexico. It was well past midnight, the road empty except for the silver glow of his headlights sweeping over the asphalt. The air was dry and still, and the radio had long faded into static, leaving only the hum of the engine to keep him company. About 20 miles from the nearest town, Aaron noticed movement on the shoulder ahead. a figure crouched low near the edge of the road. Thinking it might be an injured dog, he slowed down, but as the headlights washed over it, he realized it was something else entirely. The figure was thin, too tall to be a coyote, yet its limbs were oddly long, its back hunched, and its skin pale against the dark. As he passed, it lifted its head, revealing a face that looked almost human but stretched in ways that were not natural, with eyes that caught the light and reflected it like an animal's. Before Aaron could process what he was seeing, the thing moved, not away, but alongside his car, running on all fours with a speed that didn't make sense. His speedometer climbed to 60, then 70, but it kept pace effortlessly, its movements jerky yet unnervingly fast, each stride pulling it closer to the driver's side door. Panic took over. Aaron pressed the gas hard, gripping the wheel, but the creature suddenly veered off into the desert, disappearing into the darkness as abruptly as it had appeared. He drove the rest of the way without stopping, heart pounding, too afraid to check the mirrors. Later, still shaken, he told the story to a friend who had grown up in the area. The friend's expression darkened, and he said, almost in a whisper, "You saw one of them. Don't talk about it again." Aaron never drove that stretch of highway alone at night again. Stories like these, old and new, always leave the same question: what is really out there in the desert? For the Navajo, Skinwalkers are not a campfire story or a horror movie trope. They are part of a belief system that carries deep cultural weight. Speaking of them openly is considered dangerous, and even those who have witnessed something strange often refuse to share details. In Navajo tradition, these beings are thought to be witches who have gained the power to transform into animals by committing the most serious cultural taboos. It is not just the transformation that terrifies people, but the belief that such power comes from betrayal of family, community, and spiritual law. But for those outside this cultural framework, the question lingers: could there be another explanation? Skeptics point to natural causes, such as misidentified wildlife. A coyote seen in the dim light of dusk, its movements distorted by shadow and distance, can appear larger or stranger than it truly is. In the open desert, sound travels in unsettling ways, and footsteps or scratching might be nothing more than wind scraping loose brush against a wall. Psychologists also suggest that the power of suggestion plays a role. In areas where Skinwalker stories are widely known, fear can sharpen the senses and alter perception. A rustle in the grass becomes deliberate movement. A shadow becomes a crouched figure. Once fear takes hold, the mind fills in the gaps with what it expects, or dreads, to see. Yet, there are details in certain accounts that resist easy explanation, like the sudden shift from animal tracks to human footprints, or a creature keeping pace with a moving car for miles. The Skinwalker's presence in story and memory has outlived generations, surviving the arrival of new technologies, new roads, and new ways of seeing the world. In the Navajo Nation, its name is still spoken cautiously, if at all, and even those who claim disbelief tend to keep their distance from the places where it is said to walk. Beyond the reservation, the legend has moved into films, yet the heart of the fear remains the same: that something exists in the wilderness that does not want to be seen and does not wish us well. Part of its power lies in the unknown. Out in the desert, where the wind erases tracks and night swallows the horizon, a person's thoughts can run to strange places. It is easy to imagine a shape moving just outside the reach of the headlights, or footsteps falling in perfect rhythm with your own. Whether born from ancient warnings, unexplained encounters, or the human instinct to fear what moves in the dark, the Skinwalker continues to live in both tradition and imagination. And maybe that is why the stories never truly end, because somewhere out there, under the same stars that watched the first tellers of these tales, something may still be listening. If you've experienced something strange in the dark, or have a story you can't explain, share it in the comments. Remember to like this video and subscribe to hear more ancient tales and real-life encounters that still haunt the night.